At some point, we've all experienced it. You say something embarrassing, make a mistake, or suddenly realize that everyone is looking at you. Before you even have time to react, you feel your face getting warm. A few seconds later, someone points it out. You're blushing. For most of my life, I never questioned it. I assumed it was simply an unfortunate part of feeling embarrassed. If anything, it seemed like bad timing. Instead of helping us recover from an awkward moment, blushing often makes that moment even more obvious. It reveals exactly what we'd rather keep hidden. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Our bodies don't usually do things without a reason. If blushing makes us feel more exposed, why has it remained such a common human response? Why hasn't evolution eliminated it? Or was I thinking about it completely the wrong way? When I started looking into the research, I discovered that scientists had been asking these same questions for decades. They didn't begin with an answer. They began with a mystery that led to a series of investigations, each uncovering another piece of the puzzle. By the time I reached the end of that scientific journey, I saw blushing in a completely different way. Let's follow the science. Scientists didn't need to investigate what triggered a blush. Everyone already knew that people blush after embarrassment, unwanted attention, praise, or breaking a social rule. Those observations had been recognized for centuries. The scientific mystery was something much deeper. Why do humans have an involuntary response that visibly reveals embarrassment to other people? At first glance, blushing seems like a disadvantage. It draws attention to moments when we'd often prefer to go unnoticed. If that's true, why would evolution preserve such a response? Before researchers could answer that question, they first had to understand the biology of a blush. They reasoned that if they could identify exactly what happened inside the body during those few seconds when a face turned red, they might uncover clues about its function. Physiologists began measuring facial blood flow, skin temperature, and autonomic nervous system activity, while volunteers experienced situations known to trigger blushing. Their goal wasn't yet to explain why humans blush. It was to establish the biological facts first. Only then could they begin asking whether those physiological changes revealed anything about the purpose of blushing. The first investigations successfully explained how a blush happens, but the central question remained exactly the same. Why do humans blush? The first physiological investigations produced a clear answer about what happens during a blush. Researchers found that blushing is an involuntary response controlled by the autonomic nervous system. When embarrassment or another self-conscious emotion is triggered, nerves signal the small blood vessels in the face to dilate rapidly. As those vessels widen, a greater volume of warm blood flows close to the surface of the skin, producing the redness and warmth that we recognize as a blush. Because this response is controlled automatically, it begins before we have any conscious control over it, which is why trying not to blush usually doesn't work. This was an important scientific discovery. Researchers had identified the biological mechanism responsible for blushing and demonstrated that it was a genuine physiological response rather than simply a feeling of embarrassment. They now understood the how. But the investigation had reached an unexpected point. Explaining the mechanism hadn't answered the original question. If blushing is an automatic response that openly reveals embarrassment, why do humans blush at all? Understanding the physiology wasn't enough. To answer that, scientists would have to leave the laboratory and investigate something completely different, how other people respond when they see someone blush. That's where the next chapter of the scientific story begins. Understanding the physiology of blushing solved only part of the mystery. Scientists now knew how the body produced a blush, but they still had no explanation for why evolution had preserved it. That led researchers in a completely different direction. Instead of studying the person who blushed, they began studying the people watching. If blushing truly placed us at a disadvantage, observers should judge someone who blushes more negatively than someone who doesn't. But if blushing served an important social function, those judgments might be very different. Psychologists designed experiments in which participants observed people who had committed an embarrassing mistake, violated a social norm, or found themselves in an awkward situation. Some individuals visibly blushed, Others showed no visible sign of embarrassment. Researchers then measured how observers interpreted each person's behavior, looking for differences in trust, sincerity, honesty, and willingness to forgive. These experiments would provide the first real clues about whether blushing had a hidden social purpose. Across multiple psychological studies, researchers found a remarkably consistent pattern. When people visibly blushed after making a social mistake or embarrassing themselves, observers didn't see them as weaker or less competent. Instead, they were more likely to interpret the blush as a genuine sign of embarrassment. Participants consistently rated people who blushed as more sincere, more trustworthy, and more deserving of forgiveness than those who showed no visible reaction. This discovery changed the direction of the scientific investigation. If blushing automatically communicates genuine embarrassment, then it may do something much more important than simply turning the face red. It may influence how other people interpret our intentions. Rather than making a social mistake worse, a blush could help signal that the mistake was accidental, that social rules still matter to us, and that we recognize what happened. Researchers had uncovered the first evidence that blushing might provide a real social advantage. But that immediately raised another question. Why would an honest display of embarrassment benefit humans enough for evolution to preserve it? The psychological evidence answered an important question. Blushing wasn't simply exposing embarrassment, it was changing how other people interpreted the person who blushed. Observers were more likely to see genuine regret, sincerity, and a willingness to repair a social mistake. But that only pushed the investigation one step further. Why would those social reactions matter enough for natural selection to preserve blushing across human evolution? To answer that, researchers looked beyond psychology and into the evolutionary history of our species. Humans have never survived alone. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors depended on cooperation for protection, food, raising children, and sharing knowledge. Remaining accepted within a group often had direct consequences for survival. If an involuntary display of embarrassment helped repair damaged relationships and restore trust after an honest mistake, then the benefits of that response could extend far beyond the individual moment. The next step was determining whether blushing functioned as one of those social signals. When researchers combined evidence from physiology, psychology, and evolutionary biology, a consistent explanation began to emerge. Current evidence suggests that blushing functions as an honest social signal. Unlike a spoken apology or a facial expression that can be deliberately controlled, a blush is produced automatically by the autonomic nervous system. That makes it difficult to fake and therefore more believable to other people. From an evolutionary perspective, this matters because social groups depend on trust. Individuals who accidentally violated a social norm but visibly demonstrated genuine embarrassment were more likely to be seen as cooperative rather than threatening or intentionally dishonest. A blush may communicate, without a single word, that the person recognizes the mistake and remains committed to the group's social rules. Scientists cannot say that this is the only function of blushing, but the combined evidence strongly supports the idea that it is far more than an unfortunate side effect of embarrassment. What once appeared to be a biological weakness may actually be one of the subtle adaptations that helped humans maintain cooperation, repair relationships, and continue living successfully in highly social groups. By the end of this investigation, the question was no longer just why humans blush. It had become a question about how evolution shaped one of the most social species on Earth. We often think of adaptations as traits that help us run faster, see better, or survive harsh environments. But human survival has always depended on something else as well, our ability to live and work together. The research on blushing suggests that evolution didn't only shape our bodies for physical survival, it also shaped biological responses that support social survival. An involuntary blush can communicate genuine embarrassment in a way that's difficult to fake, helping repair relationships and maintain trust after an honest mistake. Whether you're part of a small ancestral group or a modern community, cooperation depends on people believing one another. Blushing reminds us that some human adaptations weren't preserved because they made individuals stronger, but because they helped groups remain connected and cooperative. When I first asked why humans blush, I thought I was looking for a simple biological explanation. Instead, I found a scientific story that crossed physiology, psychology, and evolutionary biology. Each investigation answered part of the mystery until a much larger picture emerged. I still won't enjoy blushing the next time it happens. Most of us probably won't, but I'll see it differently. Rather than viewing it as a flaw or an embarrassing mistake made by my body, I'll remember that it may be part of a biological system that has helped humans maintain trust and repair relationships for generations. Sometimes the most uncomfortable parts of being human aren't signs that something is wrong. Sometimes they're reminders that we evolved not only to survive as individuals, but also to live successfully with one another.